I think this will probably be the single most important explanatory video that I make because I'm trying to uh, help you understand something that's been a source of a lot of confusion in past years. And that's on the topic of program expenses, or as we're going to call them in this tab, indirect program expenses versus direct program expenses. And the first idea that I want to introduce is something called Goodhart's Law, which, paraphrasing, is that once a measurement becomes a metric with outcomes attached to it, that measurement gets gamed and becomes meaningless over time. And I want to explain what I mean by gaming. I'm not talking about outright fraud, where somebody makes things up that aren't real or that overtly breaks rules. Gaming is doing things that are perfectly legal and fit within the rules, but bend the rules to fit a predetermined image or outcome. And it's really impossible to create a set of rules that can't be gamed. Audits can help prevent fraud, for example, but they don't prevent gaming at all. And program versus administration versus fundraising is a metric that was invented by the US Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, and it has incentivized many US nonprofits to play tons of games to try to inflate their program spending versus other things. And again, these games are legal. They keep the rules. For example, many organizations have taken the approach that anything that feels like it helps somebody is program spending, and anything that's kind of boring is administration. But how something feels, or what motivates you to do it, or whether you believe it's doing good for somebody in the world, doesn't change how it should be financially accounted for. As a result of all this gaming that's occurred, the IRS's program expenses metric, from my point of view, has become completely meaningless. Different organizations measure program spending in such different ways that it's really impossible to compare them. So CG Charitable has thrown out the program spending metric. We are never going to ask you for your quote-unquote program ratio. I honestly don't believe that ratio exists. From our point of view, 100% of your spending is program spending, with very, very rare exceptions. Your executive team, your accountants, your IT folks, and fundraisers are all doing their jobs to support the organization's programs. It's program spending. But we're going to tell you how we'd like you to separate your spending into different categories. Down here in the expenses area, there's a final section called Program Direct Expenses. And we ask that you follow our instructions and not your accountant's advice about what GAAP or IFRS says you're allowed to do. Again, this is a CG document. It's not a GAAP or IFRS document, and so we're kind of setting our own rules for how things get recorded. And the major distinction that we're trying to make here is between people and things that the beneficiaries interact with directly, and that's the direct program spending. And then there's everything else, and that's indirect program spending, because again, everything is program spending. Things and people that beneficiaries interact with are going to be considered direct, either employees or direct expenses. One of the most common games that organizations have learned to play with program spending, accounting for it the IRS way, is saying that a certain percent of every leader's compensation is program spending because they, quote unquote, help with programs. They're on the phone all the time, for example. But again, from our point of view, this doesn't make any sense. 100% of every employee's salary is program spending. However, for most executives, 0% of their salary should be counted as direct program spending unless the organization is so small that the executive is also the person who's on the ground administering the program to beneficiaries on a day-to-day basis. And I think it would be pretty obvious if that's the situation that applies to you. As a corollary to this, please understand that there are always indirect expenses abroad. There's always these administrative expenses abroad. There's another tendency for organizations to say if an expense occurs outside the United States, 100% of it is program spending. But again, we're not trying to say what's program spending or not program spending. We're trying to say what's direct. What is the spending that occurs by interacting with the beneficiary? But these entities in East Africa or Central America or Asia, they certainly have accountants, they have management teams and administrators, and all of those people would be indirect spending. They would fall under one of these other categories up here. And so we hope to see, even in developing countries, that these categories are used. It's not all direct program expenses. Also, for programs we support, there is almost never going to be direct program spending in the United States, with the exception of maybe having some program-related IT expenses. But really, the United States does a lot of fundraising, and we'd like to see it accounted for that way. Someone might protest and say it's going to look like the only thing that happens in the United States is fundraising, management, and finances, but that's honestly what we expect. You're not going to be penalized for that. In reality, you're going to get a call from us if it doesn't look like that, and we're going to ask, why do you think you have direct programs in the United States? Because, again, in most cases, for the organizations we support, that isn't true. So please reach out to us about any questions you have regarding direct program spending versus everything else, and remember that it's going to be very different from what gets reported on your financial statements or 990. Thank you.